Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be taking a look at setting up our ignition coil dwell in our Motec M1 systems. Now, ignition coil dwell is going to depend on the type of coil that you're running with your ignition system. So whether you have, let's just say, a Denso coil or you have an LS GM-based coil, they'll have different dwell times. We have to program them differently. Now, when we're programming and setting up our dwell time, if we have a coil that's supplied in the drop-down list we're going to be taking a look at here in this tutorial from Motec, we don't really need to do a whole lot of setup and configuration. If you have a coil that's not listed in that drop-down menu, we do have things we need to populate and understand what the coil dwell means, and then putting values for the coil dwell that make sense so we don't have too little spark energy or we don't overheat and saturate the coil and damage the coils. So there is a fine line that we're going to walk, and each coil will have a different dwell, so meaning different brand coils, different type of coils will have different dwell times, and we'll have to break down what to do if you have no data for the coil that you're working with. All right, let's jump in here and take a look at where we can set up our coil dwell. First thing we're going to do here is move from our tuning space over here to our setup page, and then in here I have our fourth page over, coil dwell. Now everything in here we can configure and set up for the coil type that we're running. Before we do this, let's just understand what's going on with coil dwell and what's going on with inside the coil physically so we can understand what the dwell actually represents. So let's go and take a look here at the internals of a coil. We're going to find we have both a primary winding and a secondary winding inside of our coil. What we're going to find is that we supply 12 volt to our primary side of the coil, and we have an internal switching device, and that's going to be controlled through an igniter. And we'll find that most coils have a built-in igniter nowadays, and that igniter is going to be what energizes the primary side of the coil. So we're feeding 12 volt supply in. When the igniter is actually activated, we start to charge that primary side of the coil. It starts to store up energy. There is going to be a certain point where we want to dissipate that energy, and in order to amplify, to create a high voltage output to our spark plug to be able to pierce the combustion mixture inside of our engine, we transfer that energy from the primary side to the secondary side, which has a lot more windings, a lot different wind ratio. And that's going to act as a multiplier and give us that high voltage to our spark plug. So internally, we have both this primary winding and a secondary winding. And what energizes the primary winding is going to be an igniter, which is essentially what it allows that 12 volt to create and build up inside of the coil, and then create that energy and then dissipate to the secondary, creating that amplification type of effect. Now, the dwell represents how long we're charging that primary side of the coil for. If we take a look here, coming up on screen, we're going to have a representation of what coil dwell will look like if we plotted it on an oscilloscope. What we're going to find is that the total time between when we want to charge the coil and discharge the coil, that is known as our dwell time. Now we have a period of time called the coil charging, and that's where we store up the energy inside of that primary winding of the coil. We'll find that we have this kind of plateau shape, and that's going to be known as the charge saturation point, where if we keep energizing the primary side of the coil, there's no further energy can actually store up. And then when we want to actually fire to the spark plug, we'll find that we release the trigger, which is what's energizing the primary, and that goes through the secondary, it amplifies that, sends the spark out to the spark plug, and we have our combustion event. So that total time between where we start to charge and where we actually discharge is known as our dwell time. And we'll find that looking below on that plot here, we're going to see that we have all of these spark events that are happening, and we can see that we have these dwell periods happening between the spark event, and the spark and dwell time are going to be constantly going through the same process, so to speak, as the engine is running. So this is continuously going on. The coils are charging and discharging, and again, there's a lot of dynamic movement of what's going on here. We'll find that the coil dwell is very important to the specific coils that you're dealing with. So if you have a coil that needs a longer dwell time and you don't provide the adequate dwell time, you don't have as much spark energy. Likewise, if you have too much dwell time, you overheat the coil, and that cause the coils to fail. And you actually...
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here. And you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.